The church in Garner held 11 mourners and one closed casket, and outside the rain had started to fall the way it does in North Carolina at the end of March, soft and sideways and without conviction. The pews were oak, and the oak was old, and the wood smelled the way old wood smells when people have sat on it and prayed on it and wept on it for 100 years. Marin Bellamy sat in the front row in a black dress that was not hers. The dress had belonged to a co-worker at the Shell station on Highway 70, a woman named Crystal, who had pressed it into Marin's hands 3 days ago without a word, because what is there to say to a 19-year-old who has just lost the only parent she ever knew? The pastor was new to the parish. He had not known Walter Bellamy. He read from a note card. Walter James Bellamy, the pastor said, 52 years of age, beloved father, beloved brother, beloved member of this community. He pronounced the middle name like it was Spanish. He said Jaimez instead of James, and Marin felt the wrong syllable land in her chest like a small, stupid hammer. Her father had been named for his grandfather, a man who had laid railroad ties out of Raleigh in 1942 and had died of black lung in a county hospital with the same name, Walter James Bellamy. James like the apostle, James like every James who had ever walked into a hardware store and asked for a quarter pound of 16-penny nails. Marin did not correct the pastor. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and counted the loose threads on the hem of Crystal's borrowed dress. There were 7 loose threads. She counted them twice. When the service ended, she stood in the receiving line and shook the hands of people whose names she did not know. A man from her father's roofing crew said her father had been the best framer he had ever seen. A woman from the Baptist church Walter had not attended in 15 years said she would be praying. A neighbor from the apartment complex pressed a foil-wrapped casserole into Marin's hands and told her to eat. The casserole was warm. Marin held it against her stomach like a small animal she did not know how to feed. Her Uncle Roy arrived 20 minutes late. He stood at the back of the church with his arms crossed over his chest, and he did not come to the front, and he did not speak to Marin, and he did not put his hand on the casket. He wore a denim jacket over a black shirt, and his boots were caked with dried mud from a job site. Marlene was not with him. Marlene, his wife of 19 years, had stayed home, and Marin did not ask why, because Marin had learned long ago that when Roy did a thing alone, there was almost always a reason for it, and the reason was almost never a kind one. Roy left before the burial. The graveside was a small affair. 6 folding chairs, a green canopy, a hole in the red Carolina clay. The cemetery sat on a low hill behind the church, and from the hill you could see the interstate, and you could see the trucks on the interstate, and you could hear the trucks before you could see them. Marin stood at the edge of the hole and watched 2 men in coveralls lower her father into the ground. The casket was the cheapest one the funeral home offered. Marin had paid for it with the $712 in her father's checking account, and she had paid for it on a Wednesday, and on Thursday the bank had closed the account because Walter Bellamy was no longer a living customer. When the dirt began to fall on the casket, she did not cry. She had done her crying already. She had cried in the shower the night her father died, and she had cried in the car driving home from the hospital, and she had cried in the parking lot of the Walmart at 2 in the morning when she went in to buy black tights and could not find any in her size. She was empty of that particular water. She stood at the grave and watched the dirt fall, and she said his name once under her breath, the way he used to say it back when he would call her in for supper, Marin, like a question, like a small bell. Then she rode back to the apartment with Crystal in Crystal's old Civic, and Crystal did not turn on the radio, and Marin was grateful for that. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a complex called Pine Ridge, even though there were no pines and no ridge. It was a 2-bedroom unit with brown carpet and a galley kitchen and a window over the sink that looked out at the dumpster. Walter had rented it for 11 years. The lease was in his name and only his name, and the office had given Maren 30 days to vacate. She was on day 8. She spent the first week packing. She packed slowly, the way you pack when there is no place to pack toward. She wrapped her father's coffee mugs in newspaper and stacked them in a banker's box. She folded his flannel shirts into a black trash bag. She found a photograph behind the dresser, a Polaroid of her mother holding her as a baby on the front steps of a house Maren did not recognize, and she did not know what to do with the photograph, so she put it inside the cover of her father's Bible and closed the Bible and did not look at it again. The Bible sat on the bookshelf in the living room. It was a Thompson chain reference, leather-bound, the spine cracked from years of handling. Maren had seen her father read it sometimes late at night, turning pages slowly, the way you turn pages when you are looking for one specific sentence and you cannot remember where it is. He had never been a churchman. He had stopped going after Maren's mother left, but the Bible had stayed on the shelf and he had touched it, and now it was the only book in the apartment that Maren had not yet put into a box. On the morning of day 21, Roy came back. She heard the diesel before she saw it, a big rumbling cough of a sound, the kind of sound her father's old F250 used to make when the glow plugs were going bad. She stood at the kitchen window and watched her uncle's flatbed trailer back into the parking lot below. Marlene was in the passenger seat of the cab. She did not get out. She did not look up. She was scrolling on her phone, her face lit blue, her mouth set in a hard, flat line. Maren walked to the door and opened it before he could knock. Roy did not greet her. He pushed past her into the apartment, and he walked straight to the back room, the small bedroom her father had used as a workshop, and Maren followed him without saying a word because she had already understood what he had come for. The way you understand a storm before the first drop falls. Your daddy owed me $4,000, Roy said. He did not turn around when he said it. He was already pulling the canvas cover off the rolling toolbox in the corner, the red Milwaukee box Walter had saved for 18 months to buy the box he had wheeled into the apartment one Saturday afternoon 4 years ago, like a man bringing home a child. He never mentioned owing you anything, Maren said. Well, he did. Roy began to roll the toolbox toward the door. The wheels left 2 long, dark lines in the brown carpet. You got papers, he said. You got papers saying otherwise. She did not. Her father had kept his finances in his head and in a shoebox under the bed, and the shoebox had $340 in it, and that was all. Walter Bellamy had not been a man who put things on paper. He had been a man who shook hands and meant it. Roy made 3 trips. The first trip was the toolbox. The second trip was the table saw, the welding rig, and a heavy canvas bag of hand tools, hammers and chisels, and a 40-year-old framing square that had belonged to Maren's grandfather. The third trip was the keys to the F250, which had been hanging on a nail beside the front door, and the kitchen table, which Roy claimed he had built himself 15 years ago and was just now collecting on. Maren stood in the living room with her arms wrapped around her own ribs, and she watched it happen. She did not stop him. She did not call the police. She did not have the energy to lift either of those rocks. She was 19 years old, and she had $47 in her checking account and a part-time job at a Shell station that paid $11 an hour, and she had 8 days left on a lease she could not afford to renew, and the man in front of her was the only blood she had left in the world. On his last trip out, Roy paused at the door. He looked at the bookshelf. The shelf held a stack of utility bills, a coffee mug with a chipped rim, and her father's Bible. You can keep your daddy's church stuff, Roy said. He said it the way a man says a thing he believes to be generous. Then he walked out of the apartment and the door swung shut behind him, and Maren heard the diesel cough back to life in the parking lot below, and she heard the trailer pull away, and the sound of it went down the road and around the corner and out of her life. She did not move for a long time. The apartment had been gutted. The walls were bare. The corners were empty. The carpet held the deep rectangular indents of furniture that no longer existed. The light through the kitchen window fell on a counter that had been wiped clean, and on the counter there was nothing, not a kettle, not a toaster, not a single thing that said, "A man had once made coffee here." It was past midnight when she finally got up. She walked into the kitchen and she filled a chipped mug with tap water, and she put the mug in the microwave for 2 minutes because Roy had taken the kettle, and she stirred a packet of instant coffee into the hot water with her finger. Then she carried the mug into the living room, and she sat on the floor with her back against the wall, and she pulled the Bible down from the shelf into her lap. The leather was soft. The corners were rounded from years of being held. The gold lettering on the cover had worn away in the shape of a thumb where her father's thumb had rested every time he picked it up. Marin ran her own thumb across the worn place. It fit. She opened the cover. The Polaroid was still there, the one of her mother holding her as a baby. She lifted it out and set it aside on the carpet face down, and she turned the pages of the Bible slowly, the way her father used to turn them. The paper was thin as onion skin. The edges of the pages were soft with handling. She turned past Genesis, past Exodus, past the long, dry stretches of Numbers and Leviticus, and her thumb stopped between the Psalms and the Proverbs because something there was thicker than the rest. A folded piece of paper, cream-colored, stamped. She pulled it out and unfolded it on her knee. It was a deed to 2 acres of land, parcel 14 Miller Creek Road, in a township called Hollow Pine, in a county 40 miles north of where she was sitting. The deed was stamped by the county clerk and dated 7 years ago. The purchase price was $340. The buyer was Walter James Bellamy. Marin read the deed 3 times. She read it because she could not understand it. She read it because the man who had raised her had never once owned anything bigger than a truck and a toolbox, had never owned a house, had never owned a lot, had spent his whole working life paying rent on a brown-carpeted 2-bedroom apartment in Garner, North Carolina. She read it because the man who had sat across from her at the kitchen table every night for 19 years and said he was tired from work had been tired from a kind of work she had never known about. 2 acres, 7 years, Hollow Pine. She turned the page. Behind the deed was a second piece of paper, a hand-drawn map in her father's block lettering. He had written in all capitals the way he always wrote, because his handwriting in lowercase had been illegible, and he had known it. The map showed a route from Garner up Highway 1, past Henderson, to a town called Hollow Pine, circled twice. From Hollow Pine, an arrow pointed east along something her father had labeled Miller Creek Road. At the end of the arrow he had drawn a small X, and beside the X he had written the number 14. Marin held the deed and the map in her 2 hands, and the coffee got cold in the mug at her feet. Her father had owned land. He had owned land for 7 years, and he had told no one. She thought about all the Saturday mornings of her childhood, the way he would kiss her forehead at 6 in the morning and say he was picking up side work, the way he would come home in the evening with sawdust in his hair and pine pitch on his hands and a tiredness in his eyes that was different from the tiredness of weekday work, the way she had assumed, because there was no reason to assume anything else, that he was hanging cabinets for somebody or reframing somebody's garage or putting up drywall in somebody's basement. 7 years, 52 weekends a year, 364 Saturdays. Whatever was waiting at the end of Miller Creek Road, her father had been building it. She sat on the floor of the empty apartment until the sky outside the kitchen window began to turn the slow gray of early morning. Then she stood up. She folded the deed back into the Bible, and she folded the map with it, and she went into the bedroom and she packed a backpack, 2 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, socks, underwear, a toothbrush, the Bible, the Polaroid, the $47 from her checking account, which she had withdrawn the day before in a single 20, of 5 and 2 ones. She did not pack the casserole. The casserole had spoiled 3 days ago, and she had thrown it away. She left the apartment at 7 in the morning, and she did not lock the door behind her because the door was no longer hers to lock. The Greyhound to Durham cost $19. The bus was half empty. Marin sat near the back by a window, and she watched the strip malls of East Garner give way to the long, flat pine forests of the Piedmont. She did not sleep. She had not slept in 2 nights. From Durham, she caught a county connector, a small white bus with a hydraulic lift, and the connector took her through 3 towns she had never heard of and dropped her at a Citgo station on the south end of Hollow Pine a little after 1 in the afternoon. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Citgo with her backpack at her feet, and she looked at the town her father had been driving to in secret for 7 years. It was small, 1 main street, a pharmacy with a hand-lettered sign, a diner called Lou's, a Baptist church with white clapboard and a tin roof, a post office, a feed store, and on the corner across from the feed store, a long, low brick building with a green awning and gold letters across the front window, Renfro Hardware, Esson, 1962. She crossed the street and pushed open the door, and a small brass bell rang over her head, and the man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper. He was in his early 60s, big arms, white hair cropped short, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, the way men of his generation wore them, ready to drop down when needed. He wore a green canvas apron, and stitched on the chest of the apron in red thread was a single word, Hollis. He set down his paper. "Help you find something," he said. "I'm looking for Miller Creek Road," Marin said. The man behind the counter did not answer right away. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly. He set them on the counter beside the newspaper. He studied her face the way a man studies a face when he is looking for someone he used to know inside it. The store smelled like sawdust and machine oil and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco that had not been smoked in years. "You Walters girl," he said. Marin felt the floor tilt under her. "How did you got his jaw," Hollis Renfro said. "Same set to it. Same way of standing with your shoulders pulled up like you're expecting a hit." She did not know she was doing it. She tried to drop her shoulders and could not. "You knew my father." "Knew him for 7 years," Hollis said. "Came in every Saturday morning like the sun came up. 6:55 he was in the parking lot drinking coffee out of a thermos. 7 o'clock he was at this counter buying something. Nails, hinges, a pound of 3-inch screws, tar paper. He bought tar paper from me lady 4 different times. Same man, same truck, 7 years. He looked at her for a long moment, and his eyes were kind, and his mouth was not. "I heard he passed," Hollis said. "I'm real sorry." "Thank you." "How?" "Heart attack," Marin said. "On a job site in Cary, carrying drywall." Hollis nodded once slowly, the way men nod when news lands on them in a place they already half expected it to land. "I found a deed," Marin said, "for some land out here. He never told me he owned anything." Hollis put his reading glasses back on and looked at her over the top of them. "Miller Creek is about 4 miles east," he said. "You take this road out the front of the store, hang a right at the fork, past the church gravel road, goes about 2 miles in. Lot 14 is on the right-hand side. You'll see a break in the tree line. Got a dirt track running back into the property." "What's there?" Marin said. Hollis Renfro looked at her for a long, long time. Something moved in his face that she could not read, and he did not put words to whatever it was. "I think you ought to go see it for yourself," he said. She walked. She walked 4 miles in sneakers that were already wearing thin, and the road went east out of town, past a small white church with a hand-painted sign that said, "He is risen," even though Easter was still a week away and past a fork where the asphalt narrowed into gravel and past two rusted mailboxes that did not look like they had been opened in a decade. Her backpack dug into her shoulders. The dogwoods along the roadside were blooming white as paper, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine sap and the faint sweetness of new grass. She counted her steps. It was something to do. At step 5,800 and something, she saw it. A break in the tree line on the right side of the road, a dirt track just wide enough for a truck, the two ruts worn into the ground by years of the same vehicle going in and the same vehicle coming out. The grass had grown up between the ruts. 3 weeks of no one driving in. She turned onto the track. It curved through a stand of loblolly pines, and the pines closed over her head, and the light went green and shifting and quiet. She walked maybe 100 yards, and then the pines opened up and she stopped where she stood. There was a house, not a ruin, not a shack, not a foundation with weeds growing through it. A house, small, unfinished, but a house. The frame was solid, real lumber, the kind you buy at a real lumber yard, not the thin, warped junk you get from the big box stores. The roof was complete dark asphalt shingles in straight, clean rows, the kind of roof a careful man lays. The walls were sheathed in plywood on 3 sides, and on the 4th side, the side that faced her, the wall was finished. Clapboard siding, painted a pale blue, the blue of a sky on the morning after a long rain, the blue of a robin's egg that has not yet hatched. In front of the house there was a framed-out porch. No railing, no steps, just the bare 2x6 joists suspended 3 feet off the ground waiting. Marin walked toward the house, and her legs felt strange under her as if the ground had developed a slight tilt she could not see. She climbed up onto the porch. The boards held her weight without a creak. The front door was a piece of plywood with a hasp and a padlock, and she tugged on the padlock and it held. She walked around the side of the house through knee-high spring grass, past a stack of lumber covered with a green tarp, the tarp anchored at the corners with concrete blocks, past a wheelbarrow turned upside down so the rain would not collect in it, past a galvanized bucket with a pair of work gloves folded neatly inside the gloves, stiff with dried sweat, the gloves shaped like the hands of the man who had worn them. At the back of the house there was a window, no glass yet, just a sheet of clear plastic stapled tight across the opening. She lifted a corner of the plastic with her finger, and she looked inside. One room was finished, completely finished. The walls were drywall painted a soft, clean white, the kind of white that had been chosen, not defaulted to. The floor was wood, pine planks sanded smooth, sealed with 3 coats of polyurethane, the grain warm and golden under the dust. There was a window on the east wall, a real window with real glass in it, and the window looked out toward a small clearing where the morning sun would rise. Against one wall was a cot, a folded wool blanket at the foot of it, a pillow in a clean white case. Beside the cot was a plastic bin with a Coleman camp stove sitting on top, and beside the bin was an oil lantern with a fresh wick, and on a small handmade shelf above the cot were 3 cans of pinto beans, a box of Strike Anywhere matches, and a jar of peanut butter with the lid screwed on tight. And the shelf, the small handmade shelf, had been mounted at exactly the height of her shoulder. Not a man's shoulder, not Walter Bellamy's shoulder, hers. Her father had slept in this room. He had slept in this room every Saturday night for 7 years. He had slept on this cot, under this blanket, with the lantern burning low, and the east window had been the first thing his eyes had found when the sun came up on Sunday morning, because he had built the window for the sun, and the sun had come, and he had watched it. He had built this room for her. Marin stood at the window with her hand on the plastic sheeting, and she did not breathe. He had built the shelf at her height. He had built the window for the morning light, because she had said once, when she was small, when she was maybe 7 years old, lying on the floor of the apartment with a cereal bowl beside her and Saturday morning cartoons on the television, that she wished she could wake up with the sun. She had said it once. He had remembered it for 12 years. He had built it into a wall. She peeled the plastic back and she climbed through the window. She stood in the middle of the room. The air inside smelled like pine and like sawdust and like the faint Old Spice ghost of her father's jacket. She walked to the cot and she sat down on it. The wool blanket was soft and clean. The mattress under it was thin but new. She put her hand on the pillow and the pillowcase smelled like her father, the way her father had smelled when she would hug him goodbye on a Saturday morning. Sawdust, coffee, the Old Spice he had worn for 30 years because he liked the bottle. She sat for a long time. Then she saw the corner of something sticking out from under the cot. She knelt down and pulled it out. A spiral-bound composition notebook. The cover was streaked with paint, ringed with old coffee stains. The wire spiral bent at the top, where it had been carried in too many back pockets. She knew this kind of notebook. Her father had kept one for every job he had ever worked. He used to say a man who could not write down his measurements was a man who would build the wrong house. She opened it to the first page, his handwriting, block letters, all capitals, the way he always wrote. Marin's house. Started April 14th, 2019. She turned the page. Lists, measurements, costs broken down to the penny. Cedar siding, $87.40. Roofing nails, $12. Window unit, east bedroom, $41. Used, picked up off a man named Bobby in Henderson. And between the lists scattered through the notebook, the way a man scatters small, honest sentences when he is alone and there is no one to say them to messages. Page 4. Marin's room, east window so she gets morning light. She told me once she wanted to wake up with the sun. Page 11. Porch faces south. Big enough for 2 chairs. She'll want a dog someday. Page 19. Kitchen framed out. Small. She does not need big. She needs hers. Marin sat on her father's cot, and she read her father's notebook until the light through the east window turned from white to gold to orange to nothing, and when there was nothing left to read by, she set the notebook down on the cot beside her, and she put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She had thought she was empty of that water, but she was not exactly. She was something else. She was full of something so heavy and so quiet that crying would not have moved it. She sat in the dark, and outside the spring frogs began to sing in the wet places along Miller Creek. She heard a sound at the window. Soft, careful feet in the grass. A small body moving, the way a small body moves when it has done this before and knows exactly where to put its weight. Marin lifted her head. At the window where the plastic still hung, half open from where she had climbed, through a face appeared. A dog, medium size, brown and white, one ear torn at the tip, ribs showing under matted fur. He stood at the window and he looked at her with dark, cautious eyes. She did not move. The dog did not move either. They watched each other for a long moment. Then the dog put his front paws on the sill and he climbed through the window, the way a thing climbs through a window. It has climbed through 100 times before. He walked across the room. He turned 3 slow, careful circles in the corner beside the cot. He lay down. He put his chin on his paws. He sighed once, a long, settled sigh, the sigh of an animal who has come home. Marin stared at him. "You knew him too," she said. The dog did not lift his head. He closed his eyes. She pulled the wool blanket off the cot. She wrapped it around her shoulders. She sat on the edge of the cot with her bare feet on the wood floor her father had laid, and she looked at the dog, and the dog breathed slowly in the corner her father had built for him. In the back of the notebook, on the last written page, was the final entry, dated 2 weeks before Walter Bellamy had died. Almost done. Give it to her on her 21st. She will fight me on it. She will say it is too much, but she needs to know. She needs to know I saw her. Every day, I saw her. Marin closed the notebook and she held it to her chest. She slept that night on her father's cot, under her father's blanket, in the house her father had built her, in the dark of the woods, and the dog slept in his corner, and the spring frogs sang outside, and a low full moon came up over the loblolly pines, and the moon found the east window, and the moon lay down on the floor of the room like a long pale rug, and Marin Bellamy, 19 years old, with $47 and a deed and a Bible and a backpack, made a decision. She did not yet know the shape of it, but it was made. She woke at dawn with the sun in her face. For 3 seconds she did not know where she was. Then she felt the wool of the blanket, and she smelled the pine of the floor, and she remembered, and her heart did the small hot turn it had been doing every morning for 3 weeks. The small hot turn of remembering that her father was gone. But the turn was different this morning. There was something else attached to it, something the shape of a house. The dog was gone. The plastic sheeting at the back window hung still. Marin sat up, and she looked around the finished room in daylight. The walls were a clean white she had not been able to see properly in the lantern light. The floor caught the sun and held it. The shelf above the cot was perfectly level. The window faced exactly east, and the sun was coming through it now, the way her father had planned it would come through it, and the light was hitting the wall at a soft angle, and the room was warm. She found a jug of water under the camp stove, and she drank from it. She ate peanut butter on her fingers because there was nothing else to eat it on. Then she went exploring. The house was bigger than it had looked from the outside. 2 bedrooms, one finished, one framed, with insulation visible between the studs, a bathroom roughed in the PVC pipes, stubbed up through the subfloor, a toilet sitting unconnected in the middle of the room like a small white tooth in the wrong jaw, a kitchen. The kitchen had handmade cabinets in pine, sanded, smooth, sealed, but not painted. The countertops were marked in pencil, where her father had been planning to install them. The wiring was finished. She found the panel on the back wall, and she flipped a single breaker, and somewhere above her head, a bulb came on, a bare bulb in a ceiling box, waiting for the fixture that would never come, because the man who was going to install it was in the ground in Garner. She turned the breaker off again. She stood in the middle of her father's almost finished kitchen, and she put her hand flat on the cabinet door he had built her, and she felt the grain of the wood under her fingers, and she felt the small, careful sanding marks he had left in it, and she said his name out loud, once the way he used to say hers, "Walter." The wood did not answer. The wood did not have to. Outside she heard tires on the gravel. An old green pickup was coming slowly up the dirt track. The truck was a Ford, maybe 20 years old. The paint sun-faded to the color of an avocado. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. A woman got out. She was in her 70s, small, wiry, silver hair cut short and clean. She wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into jeans and lace-up boots that had seen 40 springs of mud. She stood beside her truck with one hand on the open door, and she looked at the house for a long moment before she looked at Marin. "Well," she said, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Marin walked out onto the unfinished porch. The grass between her and the woman was wet with dew. "Who are you?" Marin said. "Edith Hollister," the woman said. "I live 2 miles that way." She pointed east with her chin. "I've been watching this property since your daddy stopped coming 3 weeks ago. Figured something had gone wrong. Then I heard from Hollis. You knew my father." "Knew him for 7 years," Edith Hollister said. Marin waited. "First year or so, I thought he was a hunter," Edith said. "Saw him drive past my place every Saturday in that old Ford of his with the dented tailgate. Then I saw the lumber start showing up. Then I saw the roof go on. I brought him a thermos of coffee one morning, maybe year 3. Just walked over. He was shy about it, didn't want to say what he was doing. But after a while he told me." "Told you what?" Edith Hollister looked at her, and the look was steady and kind and did not flinch. "That he was building a house for his daughter," she said. "That you'd been through some rough years after your mama left, and he wanted you to have a place that was yours. Not rented, not borrowed, yours. Maren felt the words land. She did not let them show on her face. She had spent 19 years learning not to let things show on her face. He said he was going to give it to me on my 21st birthday, Maren said. He told me the same. He didn't make it. No, Edith Hollister said. He didn't. They stood in the clearing in the wet grass with the dew darkening Edith's boots, and the morning sun was rising up the side of the pale blue wall, and somewhere in the pines a wood thrush was singing, and neither woman spoke for a long minute. Are you hungry? Edith said. Yes. Come on then. Edith Hollister did not say anything more on the drive to her farmhouse. She did not pry. She did not narrate. She drove the old Ford slowly down Miller Creek Road with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and Maren rode in the passenger seat and watched the pines slide past the window. The farmhouse was a quarter-mile off the gravel, a white clapboard two-story with a wraparound porch and a row of peonies coming up along the foundation. Edith fed her scrambled eggs and bacon and toast and a glass of orange juice, and Maren ate like she had not eaten in days, which was close to true. How much do you know about the property? Edith said. She was sitting across the table with a cup of black coffee in both hands. Just what's on the deed. 2 acres, lot 14. Your daddy bought it at a county tax auction 7 years ago, Edith said. $340. Previous owner had passed. No heirs. Taxes were 3 years overdue. The county wanted it off their books. There was an old hunting cabin from the 1950s on it rotted through. He tore it down to the foundation and started over. Kept the footprint. Built everything else new. Why didn't he tell me? Because he wanted to give you the finished thing, Edith said. Your daddy didn't believe in giving people half-built things. He thought it was rude. Maren almost smiled. She had heard her father say almost exactly that sentence about a co-worker's birthday gift one year. What's left, she said. Plumbing needs to be connected. Hot water heater, drywall in the second bedroom, flooring there, paint, porch railing, front steps, front door, trim work. Edith ticked the items off on her fingers. It's not a small list. No, but it's not framing a house either. The hard part's done. Maren set her fork down. She looked at the old woman across the table from her, the silver hair, the careful, steady hands, the way she sat very straight in her chair, the way women of her generation had been taught to sit. I'm going to finish it, Maren said. She had not planned to say it out loud. The words came up out of her like something that had been pushing on her chest since the moment she had climbed through the back window of her father's almost house and stood in the room he had built for her at her shoulder height. Edith Hollister did not flinch. She did not laugh. She did not tell Maren she was 19 years old and broke and a girl and that the world did not let girls do things like that. She sipped her coffee. All right, Edith Hollister said. That was all she said. Maren walked back into town that afternoon, the same 4 miles she had walked the day before. Her sneakers were worse for it. She pushed open the door of Renfro Hardware, and the bell rang, and Hollis looked up from his counter, and something close to relief passed across his face. You found it, he said. I found it. Sit down. He pulled a wooden stool out from behind the counter. He poured coffee from a steel thermos into a paper cup and pushed it across the counter to her. The coffee was strong and black and good. Your daddy had a tab here, Hollis said. 7 years' worth. Paid every cent of it off 3 months before he passed. Why 3 months before? Because that's how he was. Finished what he started. Paid the tab. Then he told me he had about 4 more months of work on the house and that he was going to give it to you on your birthday. Said he wanted everything clear when he handed you the key. No debts, no loose ends. Just a house and a deed and a girl. Hollis reached under the counter. He pulled out a manila folder. He laid the folder flat on the counter, and he turned it around so that Maren could read it. He asked me to witness something, Hollis said. 3 months ago, came in on a Tuesday, brought a piece of paper, said he had written it the night before. Marin opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of lined yellow legal paper, her father's handwriting, all capitals. I, Walter James Bellamy, being of sound mind and body, leave everything I own, including the real property, at Lot 14, Miller Creek Road, Hollow Pine Township, to my daughter Marin Ann Bellamy. Signed this 13th day of December. Below his signature, 2 more signatures, Hollis Renfro, Loretta Renfro. Below those, a notary seal, the county clerk's mark, a date stamp. My wife Loretta was here when he wrote it, Hollis said. He had it notarized the same week right across the street at the bank. Notarized copy is on file with the county clerk. This here is the original. Marin held the will in her hands, her father's block letters, the same letters she had been reading in the notebook all night, the same hand, the same man, writing in a town she had never heard of 4 months before. He would die to make sure that when he was gone, the one thing he had built in this world would go to the one person he had built it for, and to no one else. He knew, Marin said quietly, he knew something could happen. He knew hard work has a cost. He knew about Roy. Hollis Renfro's jaw tightened, just a fraction the way the jaw of an honest man tightens when a name comes up he does not respect. He mentioned a brother, Hollis said his brother had a way of showing up when there was something to take, said if he ever passed without paperwork in order, his brother would come for everything, said it like a man who had seen it coming for a long time. Marin closed the folder. He came, she said. He took everything from the apartment, everything except the Bible. Everything except the Bible, Hollis said. They sat with that for a long, quiet moment. The store hummed around them. A fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. Outside, a car went by on the main street, slow country slow the way cars went in towns like this. I want to finish the house, Marin said. Hollis studied her. He took off his reading glasses. He cleaned them on the corner of his apron. You know how to build. My dad taught me framing, basic wiring, how to use a saw and a level. I'm not as good as he was. I can learn the rest. You have money. I have $47. Hollis Renfro was quiet for a long time. He put his glasses back on. I could use some help around the store, he said. Part-time, stocking shelves, unloading deliveries, running the register when I'm in the back. It's not glamorous work. It pays $12 an hour. And anything you need for the house, I'll sell it to you at cost. No markup, not a penny. Why? Because your daddy spent 7 years buying nails and lumber and tar paper from me, and he paid full price every single time, Hollis said. Once I tried to give him 10% off on a roll of underlayment. He pushed the money back across the counter. He said he wanted to earn it. He said the day a man stopped paying for what he used was the day he started taking what wasn't his. Hollis looked at her over the rim of his glasses. Least I can do is make sure his girl gets the same chance to earn hers. Marin felt her throat tighten. She nodded. She did not trust her voice. Start Monday, Hollis said. 7 to noon. Afternoons are yours. She walked back out into the afternoon. The bell rang behind her. Across the street, the diner was open, and a man in a feed cap was coming out of the post office with a stack of envelopes under his arm. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed in the smell of the small town dust and diesel and somebody's barbecue smoke drifting from a kitchen 3 blocks away. Then she heard the sound she had heard once before and had not expected to hear again. A diesel cough, a heavy idle. She turned. A flatbed trailer was pulling into a parking space in front of Lou's Diner. Behind the wheel of the F250, her father's old truck, was her Uncle Roy. The passenger door opened and Roy stepped down out of the cab. He was dressed cleaner than he had been at the funeral. Pressed shirt, clean jeans. He had shaved. He was not alone. The passenger seat opened from the other side, and a second man got out. He was tall, maybe 50 years old. He wore a pale gray sport coat over an open collar shirt, no tie, the kind of look a man wears when he wants you to know he is from out of town, but does not want you to feel bad about it. A heavy silver watch on his left wrist, a leather portfolio under his right arm. He had the smooth pink complexion of a man who did his work in air-conditioned rooms. He saw Maren first. He smiled at her across the street. The smile reached his teeth and stopped there. He stepped off the curb. He crossed the street. Roy followed him a half step behind the way a man follows another man who is paying him. "Miss Bellamy," the tall man said when he reached the sidewalk in front of her. "I was hoping to run into you." He extended a hand. The hand had a manicure. Maren did not take it. "My name is Calvin Ledbetter," the man said. He let the unshaken hand fall back to his side without seeming to mind. "I'm a private real estate investor. I work out of Raleigh. Your uncle here was kind enough to let me know that you'd come into a piece of property up on Miller Creek." Maren looked past Calvin Ledbetter at her uncle. Roy did not meet her eyes. Roy was looking at the sidewalk. "It's not for sale," Maren said. Calvin Ledbetter laughed, a small, pleasant laugh. He had practiced the laugh. He had the laugh of a man who did business in churches and at funerals and at the kitchen tables of widows. "I haven't even made you an offer yet, Miss Bellamy. It's not for sale." $25,000, Calvin Ledbetter said. "Cash. Today. I have a cashier's check in this portfolio with your name on the payee line. All you have to do is sign one piece of paper and you walk away from a half-finished house on 2 acres of nothing with more money in your pocket than you've ever held in your life. That's a fair offer, Miss Bellamy. That's better than a fair offer." He smiled again. Same smile, same teeth. "It's not for sale." The smile did not move, but something behind it did. Something small and cold settled into the blue of his eyes the way a frost settles onto a window when the air outside has changed. "Take a night to think about it," Calvin Ledbetter said. "I'll be in town through the weekend, staying at the Hampton over in Henderson. Your uncle has my card." He turned and walked back toward the F250. Roy stayed on the sidewalk for one more second. He looked up. He met Maren's eyes for the first time. Whatever was in his face was not pride, and was not shame, and was not quite either of those things. It was the look of a man who had already taken the money and could not figure out a way to put it back. "He gave me $2,000, Roy said quietly, "for your address, for the deed number, for telling him who you were." Then he turned and he followed Calvin Ledbetter back across the street, and he climbed up into the cab of her father's truck, and the diesel coughed once, and the truck pulled away. Maren stood on the sidewalk in front of Renfro Hardware with the borrowed afternoon sun on her face, and she did not move for a long time. The brass bell in the door behind her did not ring. The town did not stop. The man in the feed cap walked past her with his envelopes and tipped his hat and did not look at her twice. She had $47 in her pocket. She had a job that started Monday. She had a deed and a dog she had not yet named, and an old woman 2 miles east who had said, "All right," without asking a single follow-up question. She had a notebook and a backpack on the porch of an unfinished house in the woods, and she had a man with a silver watch who was going to come back. She turned and she walked the 4 miles east again, past the church, past the fork, down the gravel road, up the dirt track into the clearing. The dog was waiting on the porch. He stood up when he saw her. His torn ear twitched. Maren climbed the unfinished porch, and she sat down on the joist with her legs hanging over the edge 3 feet off the ground. The dog came and sat beside her. She put her hand on his head. "Ranger," she said. She did not know where the name came from. It came up out of her the way the decision had come up the night before. The dog looked at her. He leaned his weight against her thigh. He accepted the name the way a thing accepts a name that has always been his. The sun was going down behind the pines. The pale blue wall of the house was catching the last of the orange light. Inside the east window, Maren could see the room her father had built her. The cot, the shelf, the lantern, all of it waiting. She was going to finish the house. She was going to keep the land. She was not going to sell. And the man with the silver watch was going to learn that the daughter of Walter James Bellamy had been raised by a man who paid his tab in full and finished what he started, and that whatever Calvin Ledbetter thought he was buying for $25,000, he was not going to buy it from her. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The wood thrush sang once in the pine. The first night of the rest of her life had begun. Monday morning she stood outside Renfro Hardware at 6:50. The sky was the color of pewter. A thin, cold rain was falling, the kind of rain that did not commit, the kind that would stop and start a dozen times before noon and never amount to anything you could measure. Marin wore a man's flannel shirt, 3 sizes too big, rolled at the cuffs, because she had found it folded in the bottom of her father's tool bin in the back of the unfinished house, and it had smelled like him, and she had not been able to put it back. Hollis Renfro unlocked the door at 7 exactly. He looked at her standing there in the rain with sawdust still caught in her hair from the night before, and he did not comment on it. He held the door open. He jerked his head toward the back of the store. "Coffee's in the office," he said. "Apron's on the nail. Get yourself dry." The work was simple, and the work was honest. She unloaded pallets of 2x4s off a delivery truck that came in at 8. She organized bins of finished nails by size. She swept the concrete floor twice that first day, once at 10 and once at 11:30. She learned where the PVC fittings were and where the galvanized fittings were, and that you did not mix them. She learned that Hollis kept a small cigar box behind the counter where he put exact change for old men who came in to buy a single hinge and did not want to use a card. She learned that the third shelf from the floor in aisle 2 held a drawer of specialty hinges that nobody had bought in 11 years and that Hollis would not throw away, because he said the day he threw them away would be the day a man walked in needing one. By Wednesday, she knew the store. By Thursday, she could ring a customer up without asking Hollis a single question. By Friday, she was carrying a paper sack of mixed materials home down the gravel road. Every evening at noon charged to her tab at cost, and she was building. She started with the bathroom. Her father had run the rough plumbing. The supply lines were stubbed up through the subfloor. The drain pipes were in the wall. The toilet flange was set in the slab, but nothing was connected. The toilet sat in the middle of the bathroom floor like a small white tooth pulled from a jaw and waiting to be put back. Marin did not know how to install a toilet. She watched 3 videos on her phone, sitting on the unfinished porch with Ranger asleep against her thigh, and the videos all contradicted each other in small ways, and she learned that this was how YouTube worked, and she chose the man whose voice sounded the most like her father's, and she followed his instructions. She got the wax ring wrong the first time. She had set the toilet down crooked, and when she stood up to flush a test bucket of water through it, the water went sideways under the tank and ran out across the new tile, and Marin sat down on the bathroom floor and laughed because there was nothing else to do. Ranger came in and licked the side of her face. "This is not your fault," she told him. "This is mine." She pulled the toilet up. She scraped the wax. She bought a second wax ring at the store the next day, 98 cents at Hollis's cost, and she set the toilet again. She turned the supply valve. She heard the tank fill. She pushed the lever. The water went where it was supposed to go. She sat on the bathroom floor for the second time, and she did not laugh. She did not cry. She put her hand flat on the cool blue tile her father had bought in advance at a salvage yard 6 years ago and stacked in the corner of the second bedroom under a tarp, the same blue tile she had spent a Saturday afternoon setting on the floor with mortar and a notched trowel, and she said one word out loud, "Dad." The tile did not answer. The tile did not have to. The hot water heater came from Edith. Marin had been reading the notebook again at night by the light of the oil lantern, sitting on the cot with Ranger curled at her feet, and on page 7 of her father's careful pencil, her father had written, "This hot water heater. Check Edith's garage. She said her late husband's unit is just sitting there. Offer to trade for fixing her porch railing." The next Saturday morning, Marin walked the 2 miles east up Miller Creek Road, and she knocked on Edith Hollister's screen door. Edith was on the porch with her coffee. The porch railing was the original one her husband Franklin had put up in 1983. It was pine rots. The corner post was soft enough that Marin could press her thumb into it. "I have a question," Marin said, "and I don't want you to feel obligated." "Ask." "My dad's notebook says you have a hot water heater in your garage from your late husband. Is it still there?" Edith set her coffee cup down on the porch railing. The railing creaked under it. 40-gallon gas unit, Edith said. "Franklin installed a new one in '09, and we never threw the old one out. It's been sitting against the back wall for 15 years under a tarp." "Does it work?" "Worked the day we replaced it. We only switched because the gas line was going to need rerunning, and we figured if we were paying for the line, we might as well pay for a new tank." Edith looked at Marin over the rim of her coffee cup. "Your daddy was going to fix this railing for me," she said. "In exchange. He told me that himself. Year 5, maybe year 6. He just never got to it. I'll fix the railing. I know you will." They drove the hot water heater up to Marin's house in the bed of Edith's old Ford. Edith helped her wrestle it through the front door opening and into the utility closet her father had built off the kitchen, and then Edith sat on the unfinished porch and drank a glass of water and watched Ranger sleep in a square of sun. It took Marin 3 days to install the heater. She called Hollis on the phone twice and asked him about the gas line connection, and Hollis walked her through it in the slow, careful way a man explains a thing he does not want to see a young woman get wrong. He made her test the line with a spray bottle of soapy water 3 separate times before she lit the pilot. When she lit the pilot, she sat on the floor of the utility closet and she watched the small blue flame, and she did not move for 10 minutes. The flame did not waver. The connection held. That night, she took the first hot shower of her life inside her father's house. She stood in the unfinished bathroom with the studs still exposed on one wall and a plastic curtain hung on a piece of baling wire, and the new blue tile under her bare feet, and the hot water ran down her back, and she stayed in that water until the tank ran cold. Then she stepped out into the towel Edith had given her, and she dried her hair, and she walked into the finished bedroom in her father's old flannel, and she lay down on the cot, and she slept for 9 hours without dreaming. Ranger slept at the foot of the cot. He had not left her side in 11 days. The community began to arrive. She did not know how it happened. She did not call anybody. Hollis Renfro did not seem to be the kind of man who spread news around a small town like a woman spreads gossip across a clothesline. But somehow, by the second week of April, people knew. The first one was Buck Tatum. He pulled up the dirt track in a white Chevy work truck on a Saturday afternoon. He was 45, big in the shoulders, hands scarred from a lifetime of pipe wrenches. He climbed out of his truck, and he stood at the bottom of the porch joist with his hands on his hips, and he looked up at Marin, who was on a ladder painting trim around the kitchen window. "You the Bellamy girl," he said. "I am. I'm Buck Tatum. I do plumbing in 3 counties. Hollis told me what you're doing out here. Said you connected your own drain lines off YouTube." "I did." Buck Tatum grinned. He had a gap between his front teeth. "I'd like to come look at it. Make sure nothing's gonna burst on you in January." "I can't pay you." "I didn't say anything about money." He looked almost offended. "Your daddy framed my garage 8 years ago," Buck said. "Took him a full Saturday. Wouldn't take a dime. Said neighbors help neighbors. So I'm gonna come neighbor on you a little bit. That all right with you, Miss Bellamy?" Marin came down the ladder. She wiped her hands on her father's flannel. "All right," she said. Buck Tatum spent 3 hours on his back under her subfloor. He found 2 joints where her work needed reinforcement. He found 3 joints of her father's work that he said were better than anything he had seen in 22 years of residential plumbing. He tightened a compression fitting under the kitchen sink, and he stood up wiping his hands on a red shop rag, and he looked at her. "Your daddy was careful," he said. "Past careful. These joints are love." "That's what I'm trying to do," Marin said. "You're doing it." He would not take money. He would not take coffee. He drove away in his white truck, and that was the end of it. Except it was not the end of it, because 2 days later, a small, thin man in his late 60s came up the track in a maroon sedan and introduced himself as Earl Whitcomb, retired electrician, 40 years out of IBEW Local 553. He had come, he said, because Hollis had mentioned that Walter Bellamy's daughter was finishing the house herself, and Earl had bought a yard sale full of wire from Walter Bellamy 6 years ago, and Earl was old, and he was bored, and he wanted to look at her panel and make sure nothing was going to start a fire on her in the night. Earl found 2 loose connections and a breaker that was rated too low for the kitchen circuit. He fixed all 3 in 20 minutes. He stayed for an hour drinking coffee from a paper cup on the porch and telling her a story about how her father had bought every scrap of wire Earl had at that yard sale, 12 gauge, 14 gauge, even some old 10 gauge Earl had been about to throw out, and her father had paid $50 cash for the lot, and Earl had thought he was going to resell it, and instead he had been wiring a house. A woman from the Baptist church brought curtains, white cotton, handmade, a blue trim that matched the wall. "Hollis told me about the east window," the woman said. "She set the curtains on the porch, and she did not stay. She drove away in a beige station wagon, and she did not give Marin her name. A man brought a window box on a Wednesday morning while Marin was at the store. She came home and found it leaned against the porch. Cedar, hand-built, the dovetails as tight as the joints on a jewelry box. No note. Marin never figured out who brought it. These were the people her father had built among. She had not known about any of them. She started writing in the notebook every night, her own pages picking up where his had left off. Page 24, page 25, page 26, her handwriting beside his looking small and uncertain, at first growing stronger by the week. Lists of what she had done that day, lists of what she would do tomorrow, notes to herself about the things she had learned, small messages, the way her father had written small messages, except hers were not to her unborn child, but to the man who was no longer there. Page 27. The hot water works. Ranger does not like the noise when the tank fills. I think you would have laughed at him. Page 28. Buck said your joints were love. I am not going to stop thinking about that. She was on page 29 when she found it. She had been turning the notebook over in her hands one night idly, the way you turn a book when you are tired and not really reading, and her thumb had caught on something at the back, a small slit in the cardboard of the back cover, almost invisible unless you were looking, a pocket made by separating the 2 layers of the cover and gluing them back together along 3 edges only. She slid 2 fingers inside. She felt paper. She pulled it out. 2 envelopes. The first envelope was yellowed. The paper had aged the way paper ages when it has sat folded somewhere dark and warm for years. The handwriting on the front was not her father's. Smaller, rounder. A woman's hand, careful and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that takes its time. The envelope said 1 word, Walter. The flap had been opened and resealed with a piece of cellophane tape. The tape had yellowed too. Marin held the envelope in her lap for a long time before she slid her thumb under the flap. The paper inside was thin and line torn from a yellow legal pad, the same kind of paper her father had used for his will. The handwriting was dense and careful, dated 11 years ago. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she set it down on the wool blanket beside her on the cot, and she did not move for a long time. Walter, I know you will not write back. I know you are angry, and you have every right to be angry. But I need you to know why I left, because Maren deserves the truth even if she never hears it from me. I was diagnosed in February. Multiple system atrophy. The neurologist at Duke said I had maybe 10 good years left, maybe 12 before my body started shutting itself down, piece by piece. He said the first thing to go would be my balance, then fine motor in my hands, then my legs. He said by the time it was done, I would not be able to swallow on my own. I was 27 years old. Our daughter was 3. I watched my own mother die of this same disease when I was 16. I sat by her bed for the last 4 years of her life, and I fed her with a small plastic spoon, and I cleaned her, and I held a cup of water against her mouth and watched her try to drink it. I made myself a promise then. I promised myself I would not do that to a child of my own. I know what you will say. You will say she needed me anyway. You will say sick is better than gone. Maybe you are right, Walter. Maybe you are. But I could not let her watch me disappear, and I could not let you sit at my bedside for 12 years feeding me from a spoon, and I could not let our daughter's first clear memory of me be the day my hands stopped working. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand that I left because I loved her, not because I did not. Please do not tell her I am sick. Let her be angry at me for leaving. Anger is easier to carry than pity. I will not write again unless something changes. I love her. I have loved her every single day. Vivi. The second envelope was newer. The paper was crisper, the ink darker. The handwriting was the same hand, but the letters were less even. Some of them dragged at the end as if the writer's wrist had tired in the middle of a word. Dated 5 years ago. Walter, it has been 6 years since I last wrote, and I do not know if you read the first letter or if you burned it, but I am writing because I want you to know where I am in case anything happens to me and Maren ever asks. I am at the Greenfield Care Center, Bristol, Virginia, room 214. My legs went last year. My right arm is unreliable now. I can still write if I go slowly and use my left to hold the paper steady. The nurses are kind. There is a window in my room that looks out at a small garden, and in the spring there are azaleas. I heard through your Aunt June that Maren graduated high school. I cried for 2 hours, Walter. I am so proud of her. I am so proud of you for raising her right. I also heard that you are building a house. June would not tell me where or what for, but she said you have been at it for years. If it is for Maren, then you are a better parent than I ever was. She deserves a home. She deserves everything. I do not expect to hear from you, but if Maren ever asks about me, you can tell her, or you cannot. That is your choice. I gave up the right to decide when I walked out that door. I love her. I have loved her every single day. Vivi. Maren sat on her father's cot for a long time after she finished the second letter. The wool blanket was rough under her hands. Ranger was watching her from the corner. The oil lantern was burning low. Outside, a great horned owl called once from somewhere in the pines and then was silent. Her mother had been 27 years old. Her mother had been diagnosed with the same disease that had taken her own mother. Her mother had sat by her grandmother's bed and watched a body shut down day by day, year by year, and her mother had decided, when she found out the same thing was coming for her, that she would not put a 3-year-old child through that, and she had walked out. 15 years of anger, 15 years of believing her mother had not wanted her, 15 years of filling in the blank with the worst possible reason, because nobody had told her the real one, and her father had known. Her father had carried both of these letters inside his Bible, no inside his notebook, the notebook he kept in the room he had built for her, where she was always going to find them. He had kept his promise to her mother. He had let Maren be angry, because Vivi had asked him to, because Vivi had thought anger was easier to carry than pity. Vivi had not been wrong about that, but she had not been right either. Maren put both letters back into the pocket of the notebook. She closed the notebook. She put it on the shelf beside the lantern. She blew out the lantern. She lay down on the cot in the dark, and Ranger came and lay against her side, and she put her hand on his ribs, and she felt him breathing, and the night went on around her, and she did not sleep. 3 days later, the woodpile burned. It was a Friday night. She had been at the store late helping Hollis with a delivery that had come in at 4:30. She had walked home in the dark. She had eaten a can of soup. She had been asleep on the cot by 10. She woke at 2 in the morning to Ranger barking. He was at the back window. His hackles were up. He was barking the deep barking of a dog who had smelled something he had decided was not allowed. Maren sat up. She smelled smoke. She ran. She did not put on her boots. She ran in her socks across the porch and around the side of the house in her father's flannel shirt and a pair of her own underwear, and at the back of the property where the cedar lumber for the porch railing was stacked under a tarp, she saw it, a small orange flame, eating into the corner of the tarp. The wood under it had not caught yet, but it was about to. Cedar burns hot and cedar burns fast. If the stack caught, she would lose $400 worth of lumber in 20 minutes, and she would lose it in a fire that could jump to the lean-to where Ranger sometimes slept, and from the lean-to to the tree line, and from the tree line to the back wall of her father's house. She ran to the well pump. She filled the galvanized bucket. She ran back. She threw the water on the corner of the tarp, and the flame hissed and shrank. She ran back to the pump. She filled the bucket again. She ran back. She threw the water. The flame went out. She did it a third time, soaking the tarp through, soaking the ground under it, soaking herself. When the fire was out, she stood in the dark in her wet socks with the empty bucket in her hand, and she shook, not from cold, from the other thing, the thing that comes after. Ranger pressed against her leg. He had stopped barking. He was looking at something past the tree line. His nose lifted, his ears forward. In the dirt beside the woodpile, illuminated faintly by the moon coming over the loblolly pines, was a single footprint, a boot, not her father's old work boots, which she had moved to the shed 2 weeks ago, not Roy's. Roy wore heeled cowboy boots, and the print at her feet had no heel. A flat-soled boot, the kind of boot a city man might buy because he thought it looked like a country boot. The tread was sharp and new. The print was the right size for a tall man. A tall man who had walked out of the pines in the dark, lit a corner of her tarp with what was probably a road flare, and walked back into the pines and back to wherever his car was parked. Maren stared at the footprint for a long time. She did not call the sheriff. She did not call Edith. She did not wake Hollis up at 2 in the morning over the phone. She walked back to the porch and she sat down on the joist with her wet socks dripping into the dirt below her, and Ranger came and lay across her feet, and she sat there until the sun started to come up over the pines, and she watched the light hit the pale blue wall of her father's house, and she thought about Calvin Ledbetter, and she made a list in her head of what she was going to do next, and at the top of the list, she wrote one word: win. The summons came on a Tuesday. A man in a brown uniform from a private process service drove up the dirt track at 10 in the morning. Maren was on the porch sanding cedar railing posts. The man got out of his car and he looked at her, and he held out a manila envelope. "You Maren Ann Bellamy?" "Yes." "Sign here, please." She signed. He gave her the envelope, and he drove away, and she opened the envelope, and she sat down on the porch boards, and she read what was inside slowly twice, because she had never seen a legal filing before in her life. Roy Bellamy, plaintiff. Maren Ann Bellamy, defendant. Hollow Pine County Superior Court. Petition to set aside the last will and testament of Walter James Bellamy on grounds of testamentary incapacity. Plaintiff alleges that the decedent, at the time of signing the will dated December 13th, was suffering from undiagnosed cardiovascular distress that impaired his judgment, and that the will should be voided and the estate distributed under intestate succession. Plaintiff seeks half of all real and personal property of the estate, including but not limited to the real property at Parcel 14, Miller Creek Road, Hollow Pine Township. Hearing date, 2 weeks out. The county courthouse. Plaintiff's counsel, a firm out of Raleigh she did not recognize. 2 partners and an associate, the kind of firm that did not take cases like this for free. Marin read the document a 3rd time. Calvin Ledbetter was paying Roy's lawyer. He had to be. Roy did not have lawyer money. Roy had $2,000 from Calvin Ledbetter and a flatbed trailer full of stolen tools and a wife who was either still with him or was not. He did not have a Raleigh firm. Marin folded the document. She put it in the breast pocket of her father's flannel. She picked the sandpaper back up. She kept sanding. Edith came that afternoon the way she came most afternoons, now with a paper sack of food and a thermos of coffee. She saw the corner of the document in Marin's pocket, and she did not ask. She set the sack down on the porch, and she pulled out a chair from the kitchen, and she sat. "He's contesting the will," Marin said. Edith took a long, slow breath. She did not look surprised. "On what grounds?" "That my dad's heart was bad when he wrote it. That his judgment was impaired." "Was it?" "No." "Can you prove it?" Marin looked at her. Edith Hollister's eyes were steady, the way the eyes of a 72-year-old woman who had buried a husband were steady. "Yes," Marin said, "I can prove it. What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. I'm going to do this myself." Edith Hollister nodded once slow. "All right," she said. That night after Edith had gone, Marin sat on the cot with the notebook in her lap, and she went through it page by page from the beginning. She looked at every entry her father had written in the 4 months between when he signed the will and when he died. She looked at the dates, she looked at the math, she looked at the small, careful sums he had run in the margins, the cost of a roll of underlayment, plus the cost of a box of roofing nails, plus the cost of a window unit, plus the cost of 3 tubes of caulk, equals $178.23, every figure accurate to the penny. A man whose judgment was impaired did not run those sums. A man whose judgment was impaired did not write on December 18th, 5 days after signing the will, kitchen countertops arriving January 8th. Need to sand before install. She will stand at this sink and wash dishes, and I want the countertop to be smooth against her hands. She put little adhesive flags from the office at Renfro's on every page where her father had written a calculation or a careful observation in the 4 months between the will and his death. 22 pages, 22 flags. She did the same thing with the kitchen receipts she had found in the bottom of his tool bin, dated and itemized all in his own handwriting. She had the notebook. She had the receipts. She had Hollis. She had Loretta. She had her father even now helping her in the dark. She would not need anybody else. The hearing was in the smaller of the 2 courtrooms at the Hollow Pine County Courthouse, a building of red brick with white trim that had been built in 1924. The room held maybe 40 people. There were 10 people in it. Roy was at the plaintiff's table in a sport coat Marin had never seen him wear. Beside him sat his lawyer, a young man in a charcoal suit, expensive shoes, the kind of haircut that cost $150 in Raleigh. In the back row behind the rail sat Calvin Ledbetter. He wore the same gray sport coat he had worn the day on the sidewalk outside Lou's Diner. His silver watch caught the fluorescent light. Marin sat at the defendant's table, alone. She had not hired a lawyer. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Henrietta Vines, who had been on the Hollow Pine bench for 19 years. She looked at Marin over the rim of her bifocals. She looked at the plaintiff's table. She looked at the empty chair beside Marin. "Miss Bellamy," Judge Vines said, "you are appearing pro se." "Yes, ma'am." You understand your right to counsel. I do. And you wish to proceed? Yes, ma'am. All right. Roy's lawyer went first. He laid it out smoothly. Walter Bellamy had been a man with an undiagnosed heart condition. There were medical records obtained by subpoena showing that Walter had been to an urgent care clinic in Cary in September, 6 months before his death, complaining of chest tightness, and the urgent care doctor had told him he needed to see a cardiologist. Walter had not seen the cardiologist. Walter had continued to do heavy physical labor. By December, the lawyer said Walter was a man under significant cardiovascular distress, and the impulsive decision to disinherit his only brother in favor of an estranged minor daughter, the lawyer said, was not the decision of a man of sound mind. It was the decision of a man whose judgment had been clouded by undiagnosed illness and exhaustion. The lawyer was good. The lawyer was practiced. The lawyer smiled at the judge, and the smile reached his teeth. Then it was Marin's turn. She stood up. She was 19 years old. She was wearing a black dress that fit her now, that she had bought herself with 2 weeks of pay from Hollis. She was wearing her mother's hair, dark and straight, pulled back. She was wearing her father's jaw. Your Honor, Marin said, I would like to enter 3 things into evidence. A notebook kept by my father in his own handwriting between April 14, 2019 and February 28, 2026. A set of itemized receipts from Renfro, Hardware in Hollow Pine, dated weekly across the same period, and the testimony of 2 witnesses to the signing of my father's will. Judge Vines looked at her over her bifocals. Proceed. Marin picked up the notebook. This is my father's building log, she said. He started it the day he bought the property. He kept it for 7 years. He made entries in it every Saturday he worked at the house, which was almost every Saturday for 7 years. He used it to track expenses, measurements, and his progress. She walked to the bench. She handed the notebook to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge. I have flagged 22 pages, Your Honor. Every flag is a page where my father wrote something between December 13, 2025, the day he signed his will, and the day he died. I would ask you to look at those pages. Judge Vines opened the notebook. She turned to the first flag. She read. She turned to the second flag. She read. She turned the pages slowly, and the courtroom got very quiet, and Roy's lawyer began to shift his weight in his chair the way a man shifts his weight when he understands he has misjudged the room. This is a man, Marin said, who on December 18th, 5 days after signing the will, calculated to the cent the cost of installing kitchen countertops. On January 4th, he drew a scaled diagram of the front porch railing posts, including the spacing between balusters, accurate to a 1/16 of an inch. On February 10th, 3 weeks before he died, he listed the precise model number of a hot water heater he was planning to purchase secondhand, and he listed it correctly. She paused. These are not the entries of a man whose judgment was impaired, Your Honor. These are the entries of a careful man with a clear mind who was building a house for his daughter. Judge Vines kept reading. I would also like to call Hollis Renfro, Marin said. Hollis stood up from the second row. He walked to the witness chair. He took the oath. He sat. He folded his big hands on his lap. Mr. Renfro, Marin said, you witnessed my father sign his will. I did. Where? In my hardware store, in the back office, December 13th of last year, around 11 in the morning. How long had you known my father at that point? 6 years and 10 months. In your opinion, was he of sound mind on the day he signed that will? Yes, ma'am. Why do you say that? Hollis Renfro looked at the judge. Then he looked at Marin. Because Walter Bellamy walked into my store that morning with the will in his pocket, already written out in his own hand. He showed it to me. He read it to me out loud. He explained why he was writing it. He said he had a brother who had a way of showing up when there was something to take, and he wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened to him, The house and the land would go to his daughter and to nobody else. He said he wanted everything notarized that same week, which it was. A man in cardiovascular distress, ma'am, does not plan that far ahead. A man in cardiovascular distress does not write a clean will in block letters in his own hand and walk it across the street to the bank for a notary on the same day. Walter Bellamy was the clearest thinking man I knew. He was clear thinking that morning. He was clear thinking the last time I saw him alive, which was a Saturday in late February. Whatever was happening to his heart, it had not yet reached his head. Roy's lawyer stood up. He started to object. He sat down. Marin called Loretta Renfro next. Loretta said the same thing. She added that Walter had hugged her on the way out the door that morning and had said, of his daughter, she is going to fight me on this. When I give it to her, she is going to say, it is too much, but I have decided. Marin rested her case. She did not call Edith. She did not need to. She did not call her own testimony. She did not need to. Roy's lawyer made a closing argument. The argument was thin. He talked about the urgent care visit in September. He talked about chest tightness. He talked about exhaustion. The judge listened with her chin in her hand. When he sat down, the judge took her bifocals off. She looked at the courtroom. I have rarely seen, Judge Vines said, a clearer demonstration of testamentary capacity than the notebook this young woman has placed in front of me. The petition is denied. The will of Walter James Bellamy, dated December 13, 2025, is upheld in full. Court is adjourned. She tapped the gavel. The sound was small in the small room. Roy did not look up. Calvin Ledbetter stood up at the back of the courtroom. He smoothed the front of his sport coat with one hand. He looked at Marin across the rail. He smiled. Same smile, same teeth. He walked out of the courtroom. He did not say a word. A week later, Roy came back. He did not bring Calvin. He drove a different truck, a beat-up Silverado with a dent in the bed, and the F250 was not with him because the F250 had been towed away by the lawyer's collection agency, which had taken it as partial payment when Roy's bill came due and Calvin had stopped returning his calls. Roy parked at the edge of the clearing. He sat in the cab of the Silverado for 2 full minutes before he got out. He had lost more weight. His shirt was wrinkled in a way that said he had been wearing it for 3 days. He had not shaved. He walked across the clearing with his hands in his pockets, and he stopped at the bottom of the porch where the steps still had not been built, 3 feet of empty air between the ground and the porch joists. He looked up at Marin, who was on her knees on the porch boards, staining a section of railing. I'm not here about the property, Roy said. Marin set down the rag. Then why are you here? Marlene left me. She waited. 3 weeks ago, he kicked a loose piece of gravel with the toe of his boot. Said I was getting mean. Said she wasn't going to wait around to find out how mean. She wasn't wrong. He looked at the ground. He looked at the porch. He looked at the loblolly pines. Calvin Ledbetter paid me $2,000 to tell him who you were, Roy said, where you lived, what the deed number was. I took it. I took his money. I sat in that courthouse last week and watched my brother's 19-year-old daughter shred a Raleigh lawyer with a notebook and a hardware store owner, and I thought about everything I have ever taken from anyone, and I did not know how to keep sitting in that chair. He was quiet for a long moment. I sold the welding rig, he said. Got $800 for it. I'd like to give it to you. Keep the money, Roy. Marin, keep it. Her voice was level. It surprised her. I don't want it. I don't need it. You can do something with it that helps you not be the man you have been. He stared at her. You sound like him, he said. Walter. You sound just like Walter when you said that. She did not answer. She picked up the rag. She went back to the railing. He stood at the bottom of the porch for a long minute. Then he looked at the empty space where the front steps should have been. You need steps, he said. I need steps. You got the lumber. Stacked behind the lean-to, cedar treads, pressure-treated stringers. You know how to cut a stringer. I have not done one. I would have to look it up. Roy let out a breath. It was almost a laugh, but it was not quite a laugh because the muscle to laugh had gone soft in him for the time being. I know how to cut a stringer, he said. I did them for Walter and me when we were 16 and 17. He taught me. I taught him to use a circular saw straight, and he taught me to lay a stringer. He looked up at her. You want me to. Maren put the rag down again. She came down off her knees. She walked to the edge of the porch, and she sat with her legs hanging over the 3-foot drop. Ranger came and sat beside her. She looked at her uncle, 55 years old, in a wrinkled shirt with no truck and no wife and $800 in his pocket from a welding rig that had not been his to sell, standing at the bottom of a porch he had once stolen the keys to. She thought about her father, about the will, about the notebook, about the man who had paid his tab, about forgiveness, which was not the same thing as approval and which she did not yet have inside her, and which was not what was being asked for anyway. She thought about steps. All right, Maren said, let's build steps. They worked for the rest of the afternoon. Roy cut the stringers. His hands remembered. Maren cut the treads. The treads were cedar, the same wood she was using for the railing, and the smell of fresh cedar dust came up around them in the late afternoon light. They did not talk much. Roy laid out the first stringer, and Maren held the level on it while he set it against the porch frame. He drilled the pilot holes. He set the lag bolts. He tightened the bolts, and the bolts pulled the stringer flush against the porch joist, and the joint was clean. When the third tread was set, Roy stood at the top of the new steps, and he tested his weight. The steps held. They'll hold, he said. They'll hold a long time. Maren did not say anything. He walked down them once slowly. He turned around at the bottom, and he looked back up at her. He should have told me, Roy said, about the house, about the will, about any of it. You took his truck, Maren said, and his tools, and his table, and his welding rig, 3 weeks after you put him in the ground. Roy looked at the ground. I know, he said. There is no version of this, Maren said, where he would have told you. Roy nodded. Slowly. He did not argue. He did not try to defend it. He stood at the bottom of the new cedar steps her father had paid for, and he had built, and he looked at the porch and the railing and the pale blue wall, and Maren saw something settle into him that she had not seen in any man before in her life. The settling of a thing that had been wrong sitting down at last. You look like him, Roy said, standing up there like that, holding a level. You look just like Walter. He got into the Silverado. He drove away. Maren sat on the porch with Ranger, and she watched the dust of his tires settle in the late evening light. The sun was going down behind the pines. The new cedar steps caught the last of the orange light and held it. She had not forgiven him. She had let him build steps. It was not the same thing. It was not yet the opposite thing either. That night she opened the notebook to a fresh page, page 32, her own handwriting, small now but no longer uncertain. June 6. Roy came back, built the steps. We did not talk about the funeral or the truck. The steps hold weight. I do not know what that means yet. Won the hearing. Calvin Ledbetter walked out of the courtroom and did not speak to me. He is not done. I can feel him not being done. The letters are still in the notebook pocket. Bristol, Virginia, room 214. I have not written back yet. I do not know what to say. The house is almost finished, Dad. Almost. She blew out the lantern. Ranger climbed onto the foot of the cot and turned 3 slow circles and lay down. The east window held the last gray of the dusk. Somewhere out past the tree line, an owl called once. The first half of the work was done. What was left was paint and the front door and one more visit from a man with a silver watch who had not yet shown her his last card. She closed her eyes. She slept. June came on slow and heavy, the way June comes in the North Carolina Piedmont, the heat sitting on the property at noon like a hand pressing down on the top of the pines, and the wood thrushes singing in the green shade behind the house from first light until dusk. Marin bought a box fan at the salvage yard for $6, and she set it in the east window at night. Ranger lay on the cool blue tile of the bathroom floor through the worst of the afternoons, his belly flat against the grout, his eyes half closed. She painted the second bedroom pale blue in the second week of June. The paint came from Hollis. He had set it aside the year before, he said, when a customer had returned an unopened can, complaining the color was too soft. Hollis had recognized the color. Walter had bought the same color 4 months before he died for the bedroom, and had taken it back the next week because Walter had told him the drywall was not finished enough yet to do the color justice. Walter had said he wanted to wait, so the can had sat on a shelf in the back of Renfro Hardware for almost a year. Hollis had not sold it to anyone else. He had set it on the counter the morning Marin came in, and he had said, "Take it." She had taken it home. She had painted her bedroom with it. The walls turned the color her father had chosen for her 20 years ago without ever saying the word out loud. She stood in the doorway when she was done. The morning light came through the east window and hit the new paint, and the paint held it the way the sky holds light, just after a clean rain. Ranger came up beside her. He looked at the room. He looked at her. He sat down on his haunches in the doorway. "It is the color he wanted," Marin said. Ranger licked his front paw once. She found the front door at the same salvage yard the next Saturday morning, an old oak slab that had been painted over 4 times and was leaning against the back wall of a long pole barn full of doors that had been pulled out of farmhouses across 3 counties. The man who ran the yard sold it to her for $35. She walked the 8 blocks from the salvage yard to Hollis's store with the door balanced on her shoulder, and Hollis lent her a heat gun and a putty knife, and she sat on the unfinished porch of her father's house for an entire Saturday, stripping paint the layers coming up in long curls, white over green over a dark red over the original grain underneath. The original grain was oak, tight, straight figure, the kind of figure you do not see in modern doors, because the trees that grew that figure were cut down 100 years ago, and they do not come back. Marin sanded the door smooth. She sealed it with 3 coats of polyurethane. The grain underneath the polyurethane glowed. Hollis came out the next morning with a level and a new set of hinges and a deadbolt that had been sitting in his returns drawer for 10 months, and he and Marin hung the door together. It took 45 minutes to shim the frame so that the door swung freely and latched cleanly, and when they were finished, Marin closed it from the inside and turned the deadbolt and heard the small, precise click of a lock in a door she owned. She opened it again. She walked out onto the porch. The new cedar steps Roy had built her caught the morning sun. The pale blue paint Walter had chosen caught the morning sun. The oak grain under the polyurethane caught the morning sun. Hollis stood at the bottom of the steps with his hands in his pockets. "That is a house," he said. "That is a real house. It is." Your daddy would have stood here and looked at the gap along the frame for 10 minutes and found something wrong with it. He would have. And then he would have fixed it and said it was perfect. Marin almost smiled. She did not quite, but the muscle moved. The cease and desist came on a Tuesday. She was not expecting a piece of paper that morning. She was sanding a section of the porch railing where she had missed a spot the week before, and the sound of the gravel under tires came up the dirt track, and she lifted her head and saw a black sedan she did not recognize. The driver got out. He wore a tie. He held a manila envelope in his hand. He walked across the clearing and he handed it to her without speaking. He turned around. He got back in the sedan. He drove away. Marin stood on her porch with the envelope in her hands. She thought for one short second about Roy, about the will, about the courtroom, but this was not that envelope. This envelope was thicker. The return address on the corner was a law firm in Greensboro she had not heard of. The name on the outside was not even her name properly. It said, to the current occupant of Parcel, 14 Miller Creek Road. She sat down on the porch boards. She opened it. The document was not a will contest. It was something else. A letter on creamy heavy paper, 2 pages signed by an attorney named Marcus Pell on behalf of his client, Calvin Ledbetter. The letter informed the current occupant of Parcel 14 Miller Creek Road that Mr. Ledbetter had, through diligent title research, acquired the timber rights to the parcel which had been severed from the surface estate in 1971 by the previous owner of the property and conveyed by separate instrument to a holding company that had passed through 3 subsequent corporate hands before being acquired by an LLC controlled by Mr. Ledbetter in March of the current year. The letter went on to inform her that Mr. Ledbetter, as the lawful holder of the timber rights, was within his legal authority to enter the property at reasonable times for the purpose of harvesting marketable timber, and that he intended to begin commercial harvest operations within 30 days. The harvest, the letter said, would include the clear cutting of all trees of merchantable size on the parcel, including those within 50 feet of the residential structure. Attached to the letter were copies of 3 recorded instruments from the Hollow Pine County Register of Deeds. The first was the 1971 severance deed. The second was an assignment of timber rights from 1993. The third was the deed conveying those rights to Ledbetter Land Holdings, LLC, dated March of this year. The third document had been recorded 11 days before Walter Bellamy had died. Marin read all of it twice. She put the envelope down on the porch boards beside her. Ranger came over. He sniffed it. He sat down. She did not cry. She did not panic. She did not shake the way she had shaken the night of the fire. She felt the cold things settle into her stomach, the way cold things settle into the stomach of a person who has been pushed by a man one too many times. And she stood up, and she walked into the kitchen, and she put a pot of coffee on the stove, and she poured the coffee into a thermos, and she put the thermos in her backpack, and she put the envelope in her backpack, and she walked 4 miles into town in the heat of the morning, and she pushed open the door of Renfro Hardware at 9:15, and the brass bell rang, and Hollis looked up. "He's back," Marin said. "Who?" "Ledbetter." Hollis came around the counter. "What does he want?" She handed him the envelope. Hollis read it standing up. He read it the way a man reads a piece of mail that he understands by the 3rd sentence and finishes anyway. When he was done, he set the letter down on the glass counter, and he took off his reading glasses, and he was quiet for a long moment. "You need to go to the courthouse," Hollis said. "Today." You need to look at the chain of title yourself. Every instrument they cite, every signature, every assignment, every recording date. He has put something on paper that says one thing. The paper at the courthouse may say a different thing. He is hoping you will sell before you go look. I'm not selling. I know you're not. Can you drive me? Yes. He turned the open sign on the door to closed at 9:20 in the morning on a Tuesday. For the first time in the 8 years Marin would later learn he had been operating Renfro Hardware as the sole owner, and he locked the door behind them. The Hollow Pine County Register of Deeds was on the second floor of the courthouse in the same brick building where the will hearing had been held. The clerk was a woman in her 50s named Adelaide Cobb, who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and knew the chain of title for half the property in the county by heart. When Marin explained what she was looking for, Adelaide Cobb did not ask questions. She walked to a green metal cabinet behind the counter. She pulled 3 large bound volumes off the shelf, and she set them down on the wooden table by the window in the public records room, and she said, "Take your time, honey. I'll be at the counter if you need me." Marin and Hollis sat down at the table. They started in 1971. The severance deed Calvin Ledbetter's letter had cited was real. It existed. It had been recorded on the date he claimed. The instrument severed the timber rights from the surface estate of Parcel 14 and conveyed them to a company called Piedmont Timber Holdings. The signature of the previous owner of the land, a man named Earl Vance, was at the bottom. The notary seal was there. So far, Calvin Ledbetter was telling the truth. They turned to the 1993 assignment. It assigned the timber rights from Piedmont Timber Holdings to a successor company. The instrument was real. The recording date was real. They turned to the most recent instrument, the one dated this year, the one that conveyed the rights to Ledbetter Land Holdings, LLC, 11 days before Walter Bellamy died. They found that instrument too. It was real. It was recorded. Hollis Renfro looked at Marin over the top of his reading glasses. "He has the rights," Hollis said quietly. "On paper, he has them. There has to be something." Maybe. They sat with the books open. The brass clock on the wall ticked. Outside on the courthouse lawn, a man was riding a small green tractor around the boxwoods, and the sound of the tractor came up through the open window like the sound of a bee. Marin turned back to the volumes. She did not know what she was looking for. She did not know enough about deeds and titles and chains to know what to look for. But her father, she knew, had spent 7 years driving up to Hollow Pine on Saturdays and walking into a hardware store and a courthouse and a town clerk's office and a salvage yard. And her father had been a careful man, and her father had known about a brother who had a way of showing up when there was something to take, and her father had paid his tab in full and finished what he started, and her father, Marin, knew suddenly would have looked into the title. He would have looked. He would not have spent 7 years and $14,000 and 364 Saturdays building a house on a piece of land whose timber could be clear-cut around it. He would have looked. "Adelaide," Marin called, and the clerk came over. "I'm looking for any instruments related to this parcel that were filed by my father, Walter James Bellamy. Anything he recorded, anything at all, going back to 2019. Adelaide Cobb walked back to the cabinet. She came back with the index ledger. She ran her finger down the columns. Her finger stopped. "He filed one thing, honey." "What?" "A quitclaim and reassignment dated October 2022, recorded the same day." She slid the ledger toward Marin. There was a recording number. Adelaide went to the cabinet again. She came back with a thinner volume, the volume for 2022. She turned to the recorded instruments for that October. She turned the page. She turned another page. She found it, a single sheet of paper, the kind of paper a man buys at a hardware store for $2 a hundred. Block letters, all capitals, the same handwriting Marin had been reading in a notebook on a cot in the woods for 2.5 months. Quitclaim and reassignment of timber rights parcel 14 Miller Creek Road, Hollow, Pine County, North Carolina, for valuable consideration in the amount of $600, the undersigned Piedmont Timber Holdings, by its authorized representative, hereby quitclaims and reassigns to Walter James Bellamy, owner of the surface estate, all timber and timber rights on the above described parcel, reuniting said rights with the surface estate, effective this date, October 14th, 2022. Two signatures, Walter James Bellamy and the authorized representative of Piedmont Timber Holdings, a man whose signature was illegible but whose printed name underneath read Tillman Groves, the notary stamp, the county clerk's recording mark. Walter Bellamy had bought the timber rights back. In year 3 of building the house, he had walked into the courthouse and recorded a quitclaim, and the timber rights had been reunited with the surface estate, which was a way of saying that they had come home and they had been Walter Bellamy's the whole time and they were Marin's now. Calvin Ledbetter had paid an LLC to convey rights to him that the LLC had not lawfully held in 3 years. Adelaide Cobb leaned over Marin's shoulder. "Honey," Adelaide said softly, "what was filed in March of this year by Ledbetter Land Holdings, LLC, is a wild deed. Your daddy's reassignment came first. The rights were already off the books at Piedmont. Whoever sold them to Ledbetter sold him air. They sold him a piece of paper that did not have any rights attached to it anymore." "He didn't check," Marin said. "He did not check," Adelaide said, "or he checked sloppy." Hollis Renfro started laughing. It was a low, slow laugh, the laugh of a 62-year-old man who had not expected a Tuesday morning to bend this way, the laugh of a man who had loved a friend and was watching that friend reach out of the ground and catch a thing that had been falling. "Walter," Hollis said. He shook his head. "Walter." Marin had Adelaide make 3 certified copies of her father's October 2022 filing. She paid for the copies in cash from her wallet. She put them in the manila envelope from Calvin Ledbetter's lawyer. She closed the envelope. She and Hollis walked back out into the morning heat of Hollow Pine. They drove back to the hardware store. Hollis turned the sign back to open. Marin sat on the wooden stool behind the counter for a long minute with the manila envelope in her lap. Then she stood up. "I'm going to drive to Henderson," she said. "You want me to come with you?" "No, I want to do this by myself." "How are you getting to Henderson?" She looked at him. "I'll drive Edith's truck." "All right." The Hampton Inn in Henderson sat off the interstate next to a Bojangles and a long brown strip of asphalt that had been the parking lot of a defunct Ruby Tuesday until the year before. Marin parked Edith's old Ford at the far end of the lot. She walked across the asphalt in the white heat of a Wednesday afternoon, the envelope under her arm, her father's flannel rolled at the cuffs. She had called the front desk from the gas station down the road and asked if Calvin Ledbetter was a registered guest. He was. She did not call him. She did not warn him. She walked through the sliding glass doors of the lobby and across the carpet to the small breakfast area off the main reception, and she found him exactly where she had thought he would be. Calvin Ledbetter sat at a small round table with a paper cup of coffee and an open MacBook in front of him. The silver watch caught the fluorescent light. His gray sport coat was folded over the back of the next chair. He looked up when she crossed the carpet, and the smile started to form on his face, the way it had formed on the sidewalk outside Lou's diner 2 months ago, and the smile reached his teeth and stopped. "Miss Bellamy." "Mr. Ledbetter, I assume you received my letter." "I did. I am sure it was a lot to take in." Marin did not sit down. She set the manila envelope on his table. She slid it across the table with 2 fingers until it sat directly in front of his MacBook. She did not say anything yet. She watched him. He did not pick the envelope up at first. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked it up. He opened it. He pulled out the 3 certified copies. He read. She watched his face. She watched the moment his eyes hit the date, October 2022. She watched the moment his eyes hit the words, reuniting said rights with the surface estate. She watched the small, specific thing that goes through the face of a man who has just understood that he has paid money for a piece of paper that does not say what he was told it said. He set the copies down. He did not look at her. "Mr. Ledbetter," Marin said. Her voice was steady and her voice was quiet. "My father reunited the timber rights with the surface estate in October of 2022. They were not for sale in March of this year. The LLC that conveyed them to you was selling you something it did not own. I do not know what you paid for those rights. I do not care. I do not have any business with you. You do not have any business with me. You do not have any business with my land. If a single tree on parcel 14 is touched, I will have my attorney file a quiet title action, and the recording books at the Hollow Pine County Courthouse will speak for me. I would suggest you talk to the LLC that sold you these rights and ask for your money back." Calvin Ledbetter did not say anything. He put the copies back in the envelope. He pushed the envelope an inch toward her side of the table, then stopped because the envelope was hers, and he understood that. "You are 19 years old," he said quietly. "I am. And you came here alone." "I did." He looked up at her. "Your father," Calvin Ledbetter said, "was a more careful man than I gave him credit for." "Yes," Marin said, "he was." She picked up the envelope. She walked back across the lobby carpet and out through the sliding glass doors into the white afternoon heat. She did not look back. She drove the Ford home with the windows down. Edith was on her porch when Marin turned into the driveway to return the truck. Edith did not stand up. Edith just lifted her coffee cup in a small salute, the way an old woman salutes a younger woman who has gone out and done a thing alone and come back from it whole. Marin parked the truck. She walked the 2 miles back to her own clearing. The cedar railing caught the late light. The pale blue paint held the late light. The new oak door held the late light. Ranger came running across the grass to meet her, and she put her hand on his head, and they walked up the cedar steps together, and she went inside, and she sat down at her kitchen table, and she wrote in her notebook, page 38, June 24th, went to Henderson. Calvin Ledbetter will not be back. Dad, you looked, you knew, you looked. She wrote the letter to Vivi a week later. She sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a sheet of plain white paper and a pen and Ranger asleep under her feet, and she wrote it once and she crumpled it, and she wrote it again, and she crumpled that one, and on the 3rd try she got the words out of herself in the order they wanted to come. Dear Vivi, my name is Marin. I am your daughter. I am 19 years old, and I am writing to you from a house my father built in secret for 7 years on 2 acres of land he bought for $340 at a county tax auction. I found your letters, both of them. I read them on a cot in a room my father built for me by the light of an oil lantern in the middle of the woods on a Saturday night in April. I know about the MSA. I know about your mother. I know why you left. I am not going to pretend I understand it all the way. I do not. I was 3 years old when you walked out, and I grew up believing you did not want me. That is a hard thing to carry. For 15 years, I carried it, but I read what you wrote to my father, and I believe you. I believe you left because you loved me, even though leaving was the wrong way to show love. Dad died in March. Heart attack. He was 52. He never told me about your letters. He never told me about you. He kept his promise to you all the way to the end, and he kept the letters in his notebook where he knew I would find them when I came to the house. I think that is the only way he knew how to keep both of his promises at once. The one to you not to tell me, and the one to himself not to let you be a secret forever. I finished the house, Vivi. The east window in my bedroom is real glass now. The blue tile in the bathroom is on the floor. The porch has cedar railing and 3 steps and 2 old wooden chairs facing south. The oak front door has a real lock. There is a dog named Ranger who sleeps at the foot of my bed. There is a woman 2 miles east of me named Edith who feeds me Sunday dinners. There is a man in town named Hollis who gave me a job and never once treated me like a charity case. There is an uncle named Roy who is trying. I do not know yet what to do with him, but he is trying. I am okay. I want you to know that. Whatever you were afraid of when you left, whatever you thought would happen to me, I am okay. I am better than okay. I am in a house my father built for me on land that is mine, doing work I am proud of. I am not ready to come see you yet, but I wanted you to know where I am, and I wanted you to know that Dad built me a home the way you hoped he would. If you want to write back, my address is on the envelope. Marin. She folded the letter. She put it in an envelope. She addressed the envelope to the Greenfield Care Center, Bristol, Virginia. Attention, Genevieve Hartley. Room 214. She put a stamp on it. She walked the 4 miles into town the next morning, and she dropped it in the brass slot of the post office, and the metal door clanged shut, and that was that. A letter going somewhere. She had never been to a woman she had not seen since she was 3. She did not check the mailbox every day. She did not want to be the kind of woman who waited at a mailbox. She built things instead. She built a window box for the kitchen window over the sink. She built a bookshelf for the second bedroom out of pine she got at cost from Hollis. She built a small wooden bench for the front porch, 6 feet long with curved cedar arms, 2 coats of marine varnish. Ranger laid claim to the bench within an hour of her finishing it. He was on it most afternoons. She did not begrudge him. Roy came back twice in July. The first time he brought a piece of cedar for a coat hook by the front door. He installed it himself, 3 brass hooks on a single board, sanded smooth. He did not stay long. The second time he brought a galvanized mailbox to replace the rusted one at the end of the dirt track. He put the new mailbox on a new cedar post. He painted Bellamy in white block letters on the side. He took half an hour to get the letters even. When he stepped back, he looked at the mailbox for a long moment without speaking. Walter painted his name on the side of that old F250, Roy said. Year he bought it. He used a stencil. I told him it looked like he had stolen the truck and was advertising it. He laughed at me. He said he was advertising for himself. He said if a man was going to put his name on a thing, he should put it on straight. He looked at the mailbox. I tried to put yours on straight, he said. It is straight. It is straight enough. He got back in the Silverado. He drove away. Marin stood at the end of the dirt track with her hand on the new mailbox post and Ranger panting at her side, and the late afternoon sun lit the side of the box where her last name sat in white paint in letters that were a little bit uneven, and she did not say anything because there was nothing she needed to say. The reply from Bristol came on the third Tuesday in September. She found it in the mailbox after work, a white envelope, handwritten address, the letters shaky and uneven, written by a hand that had to fight for every line. Marin stood at the end of the dirt track with the envelope in her hand, and her heart did a small, hard turn, the way it had done that first morning in the apartment, the morning she had opened the Bible. She did not open the envelope at the mailbox. She walked the dirt track back up to the porch. She sat on her cedar bench. Ranger settled at her feet. She opened the envelope. The letter was short. The handwriting was harder to read than the letters in the notebook pocket had been. Some of the words ended in long, trailing lines, where her mother's hand had run out of strength halfway through. Dear Marin, I read your letter 4 times. The nurses had to bring me tissues twice. I had to ask Benita, who is my favorite nurse on the morning shift, to come read it to me out loud the second time because my eyes are not as good as they were, and I wanted to hear it in another voice. I am still here, room 214, still fighting. My hands do not work the way they used to. I am writing this with my left hand and a pen wedged between my fingers, and I am writing slowly, and Benita is going to put it in the envelope for me because I cannot lick the flap. Your father was the best man I ever knew, and from your letter, you sound just like him. I would very much like it if you wrote again, whenever you are ready. No rush. I waited 15 years. I can wait a little longer. I love you. I have loved you every single day. Mom. Marin read the letter once. She did not read it a second time. She did not need to. She folded it back into its envelope. She held it in her lap for a long time. The sun was going down behind the pines. Ranger was warm against her shin. The cedar arm of the bench was smooth under her right hand. In the kitchen behind her, through the open front door, the curtains the woman from the Baptist church had brought were moving in the small evening breeze. She did not write back that night. She was not ready yet to write back. But 2 days later, she walked into Renfro Hardware at noon, and she sat down on the wooden stool, and she said to Hollis Renfro, I am going to drive to Bristol. When? Saturday. You need a truck. I do. Hollis Renfro reached under the counter. He brought up a small ring of keys. He set it on the glass. That is the spare set to my pickup, he said. I do not need it Saturday. I will be home with Loretta. The tank is full. Marin looked at the keys. Hollis. Take the keys, Marin. She took the keys. Edith Hollister rode with her. She had not been invited. She had not asked. She had simply shown up at 6 in the morning on Saturday in a clean blouse and her old lace-up boots, with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a tin of biscuits in the other, and she had climbed into the passenger seat of Hollis's truck, and she had said, I am riding to the state line. Then you can drop me at the diner in Bristol, and I will read my book, and you will go do what you need to do. Marin did not argue. There was no arguing with Edith Hollister, and there was no need to. They drove 3 hours north into Virginia. The interstate was empty in the dawn. Ranger lay across Marin's lap in the cab with his head on the door panel and his ribs rising and falling slowly. They crossed the state line into Virginia at 7:15. Edith pointed out the Welcome to Virginia sign. She did not comment further. They got off the interstate at Bristol and they pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on a street called State Street, where the Tennessee and Virginia sides of the city ran together along the center line of the road. Edith got out. She lifted her book and her thermos. "I will be here when you come back," Edith said. "If you come back today. If you do not come back until tomorrow, I will be at the Holiday Inn 3 blocks east. Either way, I will be here." "You don't have to wait." "I am waiting," Edith said. "Go on." Marin drove the last 2 miles alone. The Greenfield Care Center was a long single-story brick building set back from the road behind a row of crepe myrtles. There was a sign with white plastic letters that said the name of the facility and the visiting hours. Marin parked Hollis's pickup in a visitor space near the front entrance. She sat in the cab for 2 minutes without moving. Ranger pressed his nose against her arm. "You stay," she said. "Window is cracked. I will be back." She got out. She walked through the automatic doors into a lobby that smelled the way lobbies of places like this smell, like floor wax and warm bread from a kitchen down a hall, and the faint, clean, astringent smell of medical things. A woman at the front desk looked up. Marin said the room number. The woman said, "Second hall, 3rd door on the right." Marin walked. The door of room 214 was open. Marin stopped in the doorway. A woman was sitting in a wheelchair beside a window. She was small, 43 years old, but smaller than that, the way a body becomes smaller after years of being failed by itself. Her dark hair was streaked with gray and pulled back into a soft braid that someone else had done for her because her own hands could no longer do it. Her right arm rested in her lap, the hand curled in on itself, the way the hand curls when the muscles have forgotten how to open. Her left hand was on the armrest of the chair. The window beside her looked out at a small garden where azaleas had bloomed in the spring and were not blooming now in September, but had been pruned recently by a careful hand. She turned her head slowly when she heard the footsteps in the doorway. She looked at Marin. Marin looked at her. Vivi Hartley did not speak right away. She lifted her left hand. The hand shook. She held it up at chest height, palm, out the way a person holds up a hand to stop a thing or to ask a thing. The hand stayed there. Marin stepped into the room. She walked across the linoleum. She crossed the 8 feet between the door and the wheelchair in steps that felt longer than they were. She stopped in front of her mother. She knelt down beside the wheelchair so that her face was level with the face in the chair. She reached up. She put her hand against the trembling hand in the air between them. Their fingers fit. Vivi closed her eyes. She opened them again. "You have his jaw," Vivi said. Her voice was thin. Some of the words were soft, where the muscles of her tongue were tired, but the voice was hers, and Marin had not heard it since she was 3 years old, and the voice was hers. "I know. I never thought I would see your face again," Vivi said. "I know." They sat that way for a long moment, Marin's knees on the linoleum and her hand against her mother's hand, and her mother's breath moving in and out of a body that was failing her, and the September light came through the window and lay on the floor between them like a small, still pool. Marin reached into her back pocket. She took out her phone. She opened the photo gallery to the picture she had taken 3 days ago of the front of the finished house in the early morning light, the pale blue paint catching the sun, and the new oak door standing closed, and the cedar railing along the porch, and the steps going up to it, and Ranger sitting at the bottom of the steps, looking back at the camera. She held the phone up for her mother to see. Vivi looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Her left hand still trembled in Marin's right hand. Her mouth moved. "He built that," Vivi said. "He built it. For you. For me." Tears came down Vivi's face without sound. They came down the left cheek faster than the right, because the muscles on the right side of her face had been failing for 2 years now, and the tear ducts on that side did not work the way they used to. Marin reached up and she wiped her mother's left cheek with the side of her thumb. The skin was warm, the bone under it was small. "I am sorry," Vivi whispered. "I am so sorry, Marin. I am so sorry." "I know. I should have stayed." Marin did not answer right away. She thought about her father's notebook. She thought about the will. She thought about the cot in the room with the east window and the wool blanket that had smelled like Old Spice and pine. And she thought about Ranger at the foot of the cot. And she thought about Hollis behind his counter at 6:50 in the morning. And she thought about Edith reading a book in a diner 2 miles away. She thought about the woman in front of her, who had been 27 years old and had sat by a dying mother for 4 years and had been told she was going to be the next one, and had decided in a way that was wrong, in a way Marin did not yet completely forgive, that she would not put a child through what she had been through. "You should have stayed," Marin said quietly, "but I am here now." She lifted her mother's left hand. She held it against her own cheek for a moment. Then she pulled the second wooden chair in the room close to the wheelchair, and she sat down beside her mother, and she opened her phone, and she scrolled through the photos slowly, one at a time, and she showed her mother every room of the house her father had built her: the kitchen with the butcher block counter, the bathroom with the blue tile, the east window with the white curtains with the blue trim, the cedar porch railing, the new oak door, the mailbox with Bellamy painted on the side in slightly uneven white letters, the bench Ranger slept on, the pale blue bedroom. Vivi did not speak through any of it. She just looked. When the photos were done, Vivi turned her head against the headrest of the wheelchair, and she looked at Marin, and her eyes were the color of weak tea, and they were full of water, and she said one sentence: "He kept his promise. He did. Both of them. Both of them." Marin stayed 3 hours. She held her mother's hand most of the time. They did not say much. There was not that much to say. A nurse came in once with a small cup of pills and a glass of water with a straw, and she helped Vivi drink, and she nodded at Marin, the way nurses nod when they have seen a daughter sit beside a mother for the first time in a long time, and she went back out. When the sun started to come in low through the window in the early afternoon, Marin stood up. "I will come back," she said. "Next month." "You do not have to. I will come back." Vivi nodded. The nod was small. Her left hand was on Marin's wrist. The hand let go slowly, the fingers uncurling one at a time, the way a child's hand uncurls when a child has finally fallen asleep. "I love you," Vivi said. "I know." Marin walked out of room 214. She walked down the second hall. She walked through the lobby. She walked out into the September air. She got into Hollis's pickup. Ranger sat up. He licked her cheek once. Marin sat in the cab for a long moment with her hands on the steering wheel. Then she started the truck. She drove the 2 miles back to the diner on State Street. Edith was at a booth by the window with her book closed and her coffee cup empty. She looked up when Marin came through the door. She did not ask any questions. "You want pie?" Edith said. "They have a sweet potato pie here that is worth the drive." "Yes," Marin said. "I want pie." They drove home that night in the dark. Ranger slept across both their laps. The radio was on low, a country station out of Roanoke. Edith hummed along to one song, and then she stopped. They did not talk. The interstate was quiet. Somewhere south of the state line, Edith reached over without looking and put her old wrinkled hand on Marin's shoulder for 1 second, and then she took it back, and she folded both hands in her lap, and she looked out the window at the dark Virginia woods sliding past, and that was the whole of what she had to say about the day. The next morning at dawn, Marin stood at the kitchen counter of her finished house. The coffee was on the stove. Ranger was lying on the cool blue tile of the bathroom floor. The east window of her bedroom was holding the first light of a Sunday in September. Through the front door, which she had left open to the cool morning, she could see the cedar porch railing and the 2 old wooden chairs facing south and the dirt track curving away into the loblolly pines and the morning mist still hanging low between the trunks. She poured a cup of coffee. She walked into the living room. The Bible was on the small shelf her father had mounted on the wall, the leather worn, the gold lettering rubbed away in the shape of a thumb. She took it down. She carried it to the kitchen table. She opened the cover. She slipped 4 things inside it: a photocopy of her father's will, the original sitting now in a fireproof box she had bought at the salvage yard, the 2 letters from her mother taken out of the back of the notebook and moved here, a new photograph she had asked Edith to take with her phone the week before of the front of the finished house, with Marin standing on the new cedar steps and Ranger beside her, the pale blue wall behind them in the morning light. She closed the Bible. She set it back on the shelf. She had come to Hollow Pine with $47 and a deed and a backpack. She had a house now. She had a job. She had a dog who slept at the foot of her bed. She had an old woman 2 miles east who had said, "All right," without asking a single follow-up question, and was still saying it. She had an uncle who was learning how to put his name on a thing straight. She had a hardware store owner who had handed her a set of keys to his pickup. She had a clerk in a courthouse who knew her name. She had a mother 3 hours away in a wheelchair in room 214 who had said her father had kept his promise and who was right. She had a father who had bought a piece of land for $340 at a county tax auction and had built her a house on it for 7 years and had paid every dime he owed before he left, and had left her a notebook with 22 flagged pages and 2 letters in a hidden pocket and a small, careful sentence written in block letters on the last page. He had written, "I saw her every day. I saw her." She walked back out onto the front porch. She sat on the cedar bench. The sun was coming up over the loblolly pines. The pale blue paint of the wall behind her caught the first full light, and it held the light the way a sky holds light just after a clean rain. Ranger came and sat beside her and leaned his shoulder against her thigh. The wood thrushes had not started singing yet. The morning was still. She drank her coffee. She had her morning light.